Nixon and Trump. Both presidents faced major FBI investigations, were accused of obstructing justice, called their investigations witch hunts, and oozed raw sexual charisma. It's not a perfect analogy, but the similarities have led some to argue that, like Nixon, Trump's time is running out.
What's going on here is very Nixonian.
Having prosecuted the Watergate case, we're well on our way to impeachment.
I was in the Nixon administration, as you know, and I think we're in impeachment territory now.
Really? But the truth is, these two are living in totally different worlds. And that has less to do with what's happening at the FBI and more to do with what's happening on Fox News.
The media and the Democrats have lied to you.
Trying to create a Watergate out of this.
Desperate to get back to the days of Watergate.
The elite media is part of the deep state.
You, the American people, should never trust this destroy Trump corrupt media.
I know we're all trapped in a flaming media hellscape right now. But during Watergate, things were way different. At the time, there were 3 national nightly broadcast news shows, 30 minutes each. Big cities typically had 1 or 2 major papers, there were a couple of radio stations, and that was about it. No 24-hour cable news, no push notifications, no Twitter, no blogs, no internet. God, that sounds peaceful. And that meant that Democrat or Republican, Americans were basically getting the same news.
This is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite.
People are basically reading and hearing and watching the same things, and they by and large believe the news that they hear.
This is Nicole Hemmer, political historian and author of Messengers of the Right, Conservative Media, and the Transformation of American Politics. We'll get to that transformation in a second. Hemmer says there is conservative media in 1970. It just looks really different.
There is conservative talk radio. There are conservative publications like National Review and Human Events, but they're so much smaller than they are today. Like when I talk about Human Events and National Review, that's just about it when it comes to weekly conservative publications.
And while that might seem like a supply problem, it's actually a demand problem. In the 1970s, Americans had incredible trust in the news they were getting. 69%. Nice. Are you serious? 69% of Americans expressed a great or fair amount of trust in the media. And that trust meant there wasn't really an appetite for right-wing news.
Most Americans have faith in the objectivity of mainstream media. They trust it. If Walter Cronkite says something, it's not seen as liberal propaganda. It's seen as, here's this guy who knows something, who's telling us something objective and true about the world.
And that's the way it is.
That's the way it is.
That's the way it is.
That became a big deal during Watergate. As the investigation turned into a national story, Nixon lashed out, calling it a witch hunt and attacking the media for covering it.
I have never heard or seen such outrages reported in 27 years of public life.
And conservative outlets came to Nixon's defense. One conservative radio personality said the press had turned a prosecution into a persecution. Another argued that a gullible public was caught in the talons of the press. Who talks like that? An article in National Review even suggested that Watergate was a trap set up by the CIA.
They definitely didn't use the language of the deep state, but that was kind of lurking there.
But despite their efforts, conservative media just couldn't change people's minds about what was going on.
They don't have the power to drive or to shape the conversation about Watergate. There's not really an alternative story Republicans can credibly spin, because they're not just going up against Democrats, they're going up against all of the networks, all of the newspapers. And so having that uniting narrative, that really matters.
To be under a constant barrage on each of the 3 major networks tends to raise some questions in the people's mind.
That's really too much for Republicans to resist.
My phone calls were 100 to 1 in favor of pursuing the path of impeachment, which was rather shocking to me.
By 1974, Republicans in Congress began moving to impeach Nixon. And by August, Nixon resigns.
Events have been rushing toward one seemingly inevitable conclusion: removal from office.
There was kind of a cohesive message about what Watergate was, what it meant. It would have been nearly impossible for the Nixon administration to muddy the waters. That's not the case today.
Right, today. The flaming hellscape, or as Hemmer might call it, the transformation. In the past 50 years, trust in traditional media has plummeted, with all Americans, but especially with Republicans. And the demand for conservative media has exploded. What started off as a few rinky-dink conservative magazines has become an entire ecosystem of right-wing TV, talk radio, and websites.
You can now exist within a comprehensive, closed, conservative media ecosystem, whether it's having Fox News on all the day or talk radio on all day. You don't need to really ever step out of that bubble, which is something you couldn't have done before.
Republicans aren't getting their news from Cronkite anymore. They're getting it from Fox. And that's a huge deal when it comes to the Mueller investigation. Republicans during Watergate were turning on their TV and seeing this.
Tonight is in the midst of what may be the most serious constitutional crisis in its history.
Now, they're seeing this.
Biggest non-story ever being hyped by the liberal media.
Greatest political hoax.
Farce and a witch hunt.
It's a sham. It is a house of cards.
The American people will put up with a great deal, but they will not put up with anyone who claims to be above the law.
The president says it's fake news. Do you even care? How can anyone trust the Mueller office?
A bunch of Trump-hating, Hillary-loving, partisan hacks. A grave and profound crisis in which the president has set himself against his own attorney general and the Department of Justice. It's one giant, huge web of corruption.
The FBI has become America's secret police.
The FBI needs a complete cleansing.
Mueller is frankly a disgrace to the American justice system.
These people need to be taken out in cuffs.
That uniting narrative we had during Watergate, it's gone. And without it, Republicans in Congress have a strong incentive to turn their backs on the Mueller investigation.
They know that the Republican base is tuned into conservative media and hearing these messages that the Mueller investigation is a sham, that this is a project of the deep state to bring down the president.
Mueller is out to get the president, it appears, at any cost.
And so if a Republican politician breaks with that, then all of a sudden it looks like he's siding with the enemy.
And siding with the enemy could be a political death sentence. A 2017 study found that watching Fox News had a significant effect on elections, shifting 6% of voters towards the Republican presidential candidate in 2008.
In that environment, politicians have to choose sides. And if you're a Republican, do you choose to side with the media that all your base listen to? Or do you choose to side with the one they all oppose?
House Republicans have already released a report attempting to undermine the Mueller investigation.
There's no reason to continue this. We've turned up nothing.
And some have begun echoing Fox News' talking points.
Mueller is desperate. He doesn't have a case he can make.
This Mueller investigation is built on a false premise and rotten to the core, Tucker.
Is the integrity of the agency in question then now?
Of course it is. We know there's bias. We know there's conflict.
And I agree with you, Sean. They're trying to manufacture a process crime.
This is increasingly becoming scary stuff. You agree?
It is. Yes, I do agree with that.
Of course, we don't know if Trump will fire Mueller or if Mueller will actually dig up any dirt on Trump. But if either of those things do happen, it'll be up to Republicans in Congress to do something about it. And right now, Hemmer isn't confident they will.
It's very hard to imagine a future in which all of a sudden they're going to say, oh wait, we now need to listen to this independent counsel who most of the conservative media have been undermining and delegitimizing for months now.
And before you call me dramatic, listen to how actual Fox News hosts are talking about this stuff.
Nixon never would have been forced to resign if you existed back in 1972, 73, 74.
I was literally 11 years old.
It's too bad for Nixon because nobody like you existed then. Our prime responsibility now is to unshackle the 45th president of the United States.
These investigations might be really similar, but on TV, they could not look more different. And for Republicans in Congress, that might be all that matters.
And that's the way it is.